What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more John Foxx. And we're returning not for the Golden section and not for the Avenum album I've been going through, the more recent one, but we're going to go back to some material that Adrian sent a while back. Big shout out to you. As I mentioned in a few reactions recently, I'm trying to catch up on some things that fell by the wayside, and I have some bonus material sent by Adrian for both Metamatic and The Garden. Now, what we're going to listen to right now is a 2-for-1, which I believe, at least according to the way it was labeled, a post-Metamatic but pre-The Garden single called Burning Car, and also its B-side, 20th Century. So Burning Car certainly conjures up a very vivid image. It immediately sounds like something post-apocalyptic, or at least very destructive. I suppose if it's actively burning, then it's recently been destroyed, not something that's been sitting in a wasteland for, decades or years. But yes, it suggests that a vehicle, which is a machine made for a particular function, a mode of conveyance, if it is burning, then it has been destroyed. And although things like cars can burn through natural wildfires and things which are not the deliberative actions of people, I think the more natural inclination when you see a phrase like that is to think that someone set it alight, someone deliberately destroyed a vehicle. So it sounds a bit dangerous and destructive, maybe post-apocalyptic. 20th century is just a descriptive label, or indeed the noun, the 20th century itself. But ultimately, many things and different phases of the 20th century are seen and defined by historians and anthropologists and cultural geographers and so on. As such, it's such a broad range of what might be on offer, so hard to get a read on that, but we'll listen to them both. This is John Foxx. First we're going to hear Burning Car, and then we'll hear 20th Century, and I believe these are from 1981, a single following Metamatic prior to The Garden.
Stage set. It's a burning car. It's a burning car. All right.
I like this section a lot. Haunting, but hard to take your eyes off of, so to speak.
I looked at my watch face. I remember the time and place. It's a burning car. It's a burning car. And I breathe in the night perfume. In the dark room. It's a burning car. It's a burning car. All right.
Almost sounds like Two-Way Army, like Newman kind of stuff. overly long, but still more than 3 minutes. So, yes, before we go on to 20th century, yeah, I like the haunting sound of the more full sonic sections, meaning the verses were very stripped down, almost like this minimalist percussion rhythm and beat with his, as I said, almost Newman-style vocals. Like, it wasn't as, let's say, android-like as Newman's vocal delivery, but the irregularity, the brief nature of the lines, and like, saying like in the dark room, the way he flowed through or indeed haltingly delivered the lines, it felt a bit like Newman's style and the Two Boy Army stuff that I've heard. So yeah, ultimately it definitely sounds early 80s. You can tell this is not 87 or 88. It very much sounds like that really experimental, the electronic stylings are still in their not early stage. I get it, there are people, Kraftwerk and so on, doing instrumental or like electronic heavy material years before this. But given all the deep dives I've gone through, it's clear that the early 80s, it hadn't really like caught in the way it would only a couple years later, and certainly by the time you get to the mid 80s. So yeah, like it sounds very avant-garde, for lack of a better word. It sounds like it's kind of weird on purpose, is I guess what I'm saying. Ultimately, I'm not sure if a clear narrative or coherent depiction came through, at least on my first hearing. Obviously, he's referencing a burning car. He's talking about things in the dark and in the dark room. Like, it seems more like little conceptual vignettes. At least that's what I heard on a first listen. So I'd be curious to hear what people have to say about the themes at play. But ultimately, I like the eccentricity of it. I like the what's the right word? The confluence of different sounds in those instrumental interludes. I guess there's sort of like the chorus, because again, it seemed like the verses were what was stripped down, and then it would get very full, and they'd have those like sweeping sort of pad synths or whatever they were. But yes, ultimately a quirky little tune, but I enjoyed it, and I like the haunting feel that it gave off, so that seemed to fit with the title certainly. And now we shall hear 20th Century, which is the B-side.
20th century. 20th century.
Oof. That deep.
20th century.
I like the pace. Dissonant, wicked. Like the 20th century, right? back half of the percussion scheme. Madness. So it's funny, I talk about Burning Car feeling experimental and deliberately off the beaten path. This is even more so. This feels properly like a B-side, even within the context of a single like Burning Car. So it makes sense to me that this was a B-side and something that was even more unusual compared to the title track of the single, from what I understand. And yes, no real lyrics per se, other than to declare it's the 20th century. And I was thinking, there's some sounds in there which you can interpret as historical statements, if you will, about the 20th century. We definitely have an explosion, a bomb sound, and among many other bombs of the 20th century, the first combat usage of nuclear weapons comes in the 20th century. Ultimately, there's sounds that are akin to alarms or, radar, other sonic imagery, if you will, that could be interpreted as about the human conflicts or brutal events of the 20th century, which is, as a historian, I can say the 20th century, it's, such a long span of time, and, depends on what region you're talking about and in what context, socially, politically, culturally, and so on. But it's an interesting dynamic in that it's the most free, or it has the most liberty, perhaps, of any century in recorded history up to that point, but also the most brutal and totalitarian, authoritarian governments up until that point. It has, let's say, the most philanthropy and the most internationalism, but also the most intense and cruelly efficient nationalism and restrictions and so on. So it's like this, it's this very complicated historical entity, which of course speaks to the way that it's an arbitrary, contrived, didactic measuring of time more than it is some natural unit of time as it relates to, human history and human existence, or the earth for that matter. Nevertheless, the point is, I feel like there are some sounds in there that you can interpret as comments about the 20th century up until the point when he was writing this in 81, but it also feels like it could just be a comment about, this is the 20th century, or it's the 20th century, and this is the crazy electronic sounds that are now defining what people are doing in art and music and so on, which makes me think of a documentary I saw about the early Depeche Mode material, and how, like, their plan, they wanted to be like an OMD from Basildon, but they were talking about, some of the people in that documentary talking about, well, they were heralding the end of the guitar. It was seen as like, well, bands these days, they're going to be using keyboards. This is the future. The guitar, that's old news. These other types of instruments and so on, they're very antiquated with where technology is going. And so when I hear him say it's the 20th century, as all these crazy electronic and distorted noises are phasing in and out, and there's this very rapid drum machine type rhythm, I'm thinking that it could be a comment about what it was seeing music is becoming, the way art and technology are going. So I suppose that would already be a more specific facet of the general point that I'm taking away from what I heard. But yes, it's obviously very eccentric, very experimental. It's dissonant, more dissonant than Burning Car. Burning Car had a haunted sound. This had a very dissonant, almost like challenging to the ear sort of sound in a couple moments. But, as someone who likes dissonant techno, and, I like score that gets you a little bit uncomfortable if it, fits the part of the show or the movie that it's in, I can swing with that. I can roll with some dissonance, even if it's a bit challenging to the ear. But yes, this is definitely an experimental B-side, and unapologetically so. In any case, once again, shout out to Adrian, not only for sharing the material, but for being patient. I saw him comment, in the last couple of days on some other reactions, so ultimately I do appreciate the patience. Other folks who've been following the John Foxx reactions know that I will get back to the Golden section, and eventually I'll get back to Avenum, but for the time being, I thought it'd be nice to finally go back and go through some of these bonus tunes for both Metamatic and The Garden. So let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Peace.